Hi, my name's Phil and welcome to LabourVision, where we discuss Labour's policies. In the last week, we've had some interesting information on both workers' rights and asylum. So I think I'll cover asylum this week and then workers' rights next week after the potentially spicy meeting with union leaders coming up. So in terms of asylum, let us discuss the main problems. The core problem, which is almost never talked about, does not begin with small boats or safe routes, but the reason why refugees even exist. As a result of climate change or war or brutal government regimes in otherwise stable countries, some people must flee to somewhere safer. That we individually and as part of an international community have not done enough to stabilise other countries in the world is the reason why refugees exist. If we don't like asylum, we should help reduce the need for it. The second problem is that the Conservatives have systematically closed off safe ways of applying for asylum. It is literally now impossible for any refugee, other than for a few very carefully prescribed situations, to claim asylum in the UK. Even refugees from Afghanistan, which the government accepts is not safe, have no conventional way of seeking asylum here. The consequences of this is that asylum seekers now carry out dangerous journeys across the Channel because there is literally no other way. These channel crossings did not exist a few years ago. Third problem is that the government, some years ago, massively scaled back the number of staff processing claims. The consequence is that we now have a massive backlog, necessitating expensive accommodation, the hotels. I don't know how many people realise it, but the Conservatives last summer simply stopped processing all claims from new claimants. In other words, everyone coming across the Channel now will never have their claims processed unless the system changes. The only claims being processed right now are the ones who arrived before a certain date last summer. I forget the exact date. So that means if this continues, we will just need more and more accommodation for them. There is no way of deporting these asylum seekers because we have to be able to process their claim and determine that their claim is not valid in order to legally do so. Rwanda is not a solution because the agreement only allows us to send a few hundred, about like 1 day's worth, in the next few years. And the final problem is that the issue has now become so toxic, with so much disinformation being pushed on people, that it's a political hot potato for any political party, including, of course, Labour. So what are Labour going to do about it? Well, in terms of Starmer's speech this week, it's very much in line with previous speeches. The emphasis is on tackling the people smuggling gangs. Now, you will notice that I did not mention these as any of the four main problems. Now, perhaps I should, but I am of the view that if you dealt with the four problems that I described, then the smuggling gangs would have no trade to ply. So the smuggling gangs are not actually a problem as such, they are a consequence of other problems. But because of the political sensitivity of the subject now, Labour are mostly emphasising their plans to scrap the Rwanda plan, which does nothing, and use the money to support sophisticated policing and law enforcement in order to shut down the smuggling gangs. And because this is what Labour keep talking about very loudly, people assume that this is it, this is their plan. They look at it, experts look at it and go, well, yeah, that on its own ain't going to work, mate. And that's absolutely correct, it's not. It doesn't address any of the first three problems I cited and only partially addresses the political side. Put it this way, the Tories say their Rwanda plan will work, Labour say their policing plan will work better. How are people going to judge? There are two metrics: the number of people coming across the Channel to claim asylum and the size of the asylum backlog. That's it. And before I explain the policies which Labour have but are only whispering, I will say this. How do we know that Labour want to genuinely deal with the real problems? Because they have to. It's got nothing to do with trusting them as people. They have to out of strategic necessity. If Labour do not stop the boats and they do not stop the use of either inhumane or expensive accommodation for asylum seekers, Reform UK in particular will continue to feed. The best way for the Tories to have stopped Reform UK before they even started was to have applied proper solutions to the problems they feed off instead of creating them. Well, the same is true of Labour. So what are Labour's quieter policies? Well, in terms of the core issues, getting international development funding back to 0.7% of GDP, the Tories not only cut this number, but despite promising not to, by the way, but what little they do spend actually turns out to be spent in the UK now. So there's almost no genuine international development funding from the UK at all. But if you want to deal with asylum, then the way to reduce the number of refugees is by helping them make their own countries safe in the first place. Now, obviously, the UK alone cannot solve all the problems in the world, but Labour will at least make sure we're once again pulling our weight. Labour also have a policy of increasing the number of staff available to process claims. And Starmer confirmed this week that everyone will have their claims processed, even if they arrive via small boat. This will mean they will eventually get the backlog down to a manageable level. It will mean deportations actually increase, because if you process claims, that means processing the claims that are ultimately unsuccessful, and then you can legally deport them, no problem. It will also mean we need less public money for accommodation, and people who get their kicks out of protesting against outside hotels, they can knock it off and find another hobby. Also, as most of these dodgy hotels tend to be owned by Tory donors, it means less public money finding its way into their pockets. Bonus. In fact, Labour will end the hotel use altogether once the backlog is cleared. They will also seek closer cooperation with the EU on returns policies. Anti-asylum loudmouths complain that this will mean taking asylum seekers from other countries. Yeah, maybe, but it will make sure that we're prioritising asylum seekers who may already have family or other community links here, which is way more efficient and able to more easily return those who don't need to be here at all. It will make it possible to actually stop the boats and reduce the backlog at the same time. And those are the two metrics which the public will be basing their judgments on. And then, of course, Labour have policies to deal with people smuggling side of things, not just working with European authorities on a continental-wide basis, but at source as well in North Africa. You know, these are the policies they're shouting about the most loudly. But as I say, people know that this won't solve the problem on its own, indeed. But the policing is not the entirety of Labour's policies. It just forms the bulk of their speeches on it. It's just the ones they're shouting about. Like I also said, Labour have to stop the boats. They have to clear the backlog. Labour want to use the first term to build up a reputation for competence so that they can go into the next election and say, right, we delivered all this. Now we're going to deliver this next thing, and you can trust us to do it because we've proven we can deliver. It is essential that they succeed on what we know the media are going to make a priority policy. And it's in nobody's interest that in a few years' time, Reform UK get to say, well, the Tories failed and now Labour have failed. Guess we're the only ones with a real plan left. So yeah, Labour will deal with it. They'll deal with it in a multi-pronged approach. They will do so within international law. That is not me saying that I'm confident that human rights groups will all go, oh, this is all brilliant in a few years' time. I'm sure there'll still be objections. Asylum will remain a politically sensitive subject everywhere. Even countries who pride themselves on their humanity face political pressure against levels of asylum being perceived to be higher than they should, even though the real numbers for the UK are actually really small. We're not going to be as welcoming as the right-wing shills suggest, I'm sure. Even Labour will want to reduce the size of our asylum obligations. But as long as the channel crossings stop and as long as the backlog doesn't require special accommodation, and if pressure on housing is eased in general, then the public will soon stop having an issue with asylum. Because the most important thing Labour need to do in order to be able to act with the humanity we expect of them is take the poison out of the issue. Make sure the media, the Tories and Reform UK have got absolutely nothing to bellyache about. But there we are. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found the video interesting, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.